The transport shuttle rattled as it descended through Ashera Prime's atmosphere, and David Ross gripped his seat harder than necessary. Through the viewport, he watched the landscape below transform from dark space into an endless ocean of red sand and black rock. Twin suns blazed overhead, making the entire planet shimmer like a mirage. He had seen hot worlds before, but nothing like this. The other engineers in the shuttle were busy checking their equipment and reviewing technical documents. David just stared out the window, wondering why he had volunteered for this assignment. The official reason was good pay and a chance to work with alien technology. The real reason sat buried in his chest like a stone, something you try not to think about too often. The shuttle touched down on a landing pad that seemed to be made of polished obsidian. Heat waves rose from the surface, even through the craft's cooling systems. When the doors opened, the temperature hit David like a physical wall. 173 degrees Fahrenheit. His suit's display informed him. He stepped onto the scorched planet and immediately understood why the Asherans had conquered 17 other worlds. Any species that evolved in this heat would be terrifying in combat that a delegation of Asherans waited by the landing pad. They looked almost crystalline, their skin catching the double sunlight and scattering it into rainbow patterns. They were tall, easily 7 feet, with geometric features that seemed carved rather than grown. The leader stepped forward, and David noticed how gracefully they moved despite their size. "I am High Architect Sylvan," the Asheran said, voice resonating like struck glass. "Welcome to Ashera Prime. Your reputation precedes you, Engineer Ross." David doubted that. He was good at his job, sure, but he was not famous. More likely, the Asherans had researched every human in the delegation, looking for weaknesses or advantages. That was what conquerors did. They were led underground through tunnels carved from cooled magma stone. The temperature dropped to a merely unbearable 140 degrees. Cities spread out beneath the surface, vast caverns filled with crystal towers and flowing energy streams. It was beautiful in an alien way, all sharp angles and reflected light. "Our atmospheric cooling project has failed," Sylvan explained as they walked. "We have studied the technology of conquered worlds, adapted their science, but we cannot generate true cold. Only less heat." "Why do you need cold?" one of the other human engineers asked. "Your species evolved without it." Sylvan's crystalline face betrayed no emotion, but something in the silence that followed felt heavy. They entered a massive chamber that appeared to be a palace. Geometric patterns covered every surface, and in the center sat a throne carved from a single piece of dark crystal. Emperor Draven rose from the throne. He was larger than Sylvan, his crystalline skin etched with what looked like battle scars. His eyes, multifaceted like gems, fixed on David with an intensity that made the human engineer want to step back. "My daughter is dying," the Emperor said without preamble. "She suffers from scale fade, a genetic condition where the crystalline structure of skin degrades. The only treatment requires sustained cold temperatures. Temperatures my world has never naturally produced." David felt something twist in his chest. A dying child. Of course it was a dying child. "We are not asking for charity," Emperor Draven continued. "We offer technology exchange, trade agreements, whatever humans desire. But you have 18 of your days to find a solution, or your delegation will be expelled from this sector permanently." The other engineers immediately began discussing possibilities, talking about atmospheric processors and thermal regulation. David barely heard them. He was thinking about hospital rooms and doctors' voices and the feeling of complete helplessness. That evening, they were given quarters in the palace, rooms carved into the rock with geometric precision. David could not sleep despite his exhaustion. He put on his environmental suit and walked through the palace corridors, eventually finding his way to an observation deck that looked out over the Scorched Valley. Both suns were setting, painting the desert in shades of orange and red. The heat was still over 160 degrees, even as night approached. David pressed his gloved hand against the transparent wall and wondered how anything lived in this environment. "Are you the one who will save my daughter?" David turned quickly. A small Asheran stood behind him, barely 4 feet tall, wearing what looked like a protective suit adapted for someone her size. Even through the suit's faceplate, he could see her crystalline skin was dulled, patches of it looking almost gray. "I am Princess Lyra," she said, her voice higher than the adult Asheron's, but with the same glass-like quality. "I heard the engineers talking. They said it was impossible. But you did not say anything." David knelt down, so he was closer to her height. "I haven't decided yet if it's impossible." "What is snow like?" Lyra asked suddenly. "I have seen recordings from conquered worlds, but I do not understand." "Is it like sand but white?" "Sort of," David said. "But cold. So cold it makes your fingers hurt if you hold it too long. And it melts when it gets warm, turning into water." "We have water," Lyra said, "but always hot, boiling up from deep rocks." David reached into his suit's utility pocket and pulled out a small cooling unit, the kind used to keep drinks cold during field work. He activated it and held it out. Condensation formed on the outside, tiny droplets of water cooler than anything on this planet. "Touch this," he said. Lyra reached out hesitantly, her small crystalline hand meeting the cool metal. She gasped, pulling back, then touching it again with what looked like wonder. "Cold," she whispered. "This is cold." "That is just a little bit cold," David said. "Snow is much colder. Beautiful and white and soft. It falls from the sky like rain, but instead of water drops, you get tiny pieces of ice, all different shapes." "Will I ever see it?" Lyra asked, and David heard something in her voice that broke his heart. She was not asking if it was possible. She was asking if she would live long enough. David looked at this small alien child, standing in her protective suit on a planet that was actively killing her, and he made a decision that was probably stupid. "Yes," he said, "I will show you snow." He had no idea how, but he had made a promise. And this time, maybe this time, he could keep it. David spent the next 3 days buried in Asheron technical databases, trying to understand how a species could develop advanced technology without ever experiencing freezing temperatures. Their entire scientific framework was built around heat management, energy distribution, and thermodynamics. The concept of removing heat to create cold was alien to them, like trying to explain color to someone who had only ever seen in black and white. The other human engineers were already talking about giving up. "Too risky," they said. "Too complicated. The physics do not work." David ignored them and kept studying. On the 4th night, Lyra found him again. She had a habit of sneaking away from her caretakers, appearing in the engineering bay where David had set up his workspace. Her crystalline skin looked worse each time he saw her, more patches turning gray and dull. "Tell me about winter," she said, settling onto a bench near his workstation. David looked up from his holographic displays. "Should you not be resting?" "Resting is boring," Lyra said, "and I want to hear about things I have never seen. Tell me about ice." So David told her. He described frozen lakes that you could walk on, ice so thick it could hold the weight of vehicles. He told her about icicles hanging from roofs like crystal spears, about frost patterns on windows that looked like alien art. He showed her pictures from his personal files, winter scenes from Earth that made Lyra lean forward with fascination. "We could skate on the ice?" she asked, staring at an image of people gliding across a frozen pond. "If we could make enough of it, yes." "I would like that," Lyra said quietly. "Gliding like that. It looks like flying, but on the ground." David felt that familiar ache in his chest. His daughter Amy had loved ice skating. He still had videos of her spinning on the ice, laughing, so alive and full of energy. That was before the diagnosis, before the hospital visits, before the helpless watching as she got sicker and weaker. "My father says you are wasting your time," Lyra said, breaking into his thoughts. "He says humans are clever, but this is beyond even your abilities." "Your father might be right," David admitted. "The energy requirements alone are enormous, and I would need to essentially reverse engineer your entire atmospheric system. But you have not given up." "No." "Why not?" David saved his work and turned to face her fully. "Because someone should try. Because maybe impossible just means nobody has figured out yet. And because I promised you." Lyra tilted her head, light scattering off her dulled crystalline skin. "Humans make many promises they cannot keep." "Sometimes," David agreed, "but I'm going to try very hard to keep this one." After Lyra left, David went back to his research with renewed focus. He pulled up atmospheric composition data for HFY Prime, mostly carbon dioxide and nitrogen, with trace amounts of water vapor that immediately boiled away. But there was something else, something he had almost missed. Ammonia compounds in the upper atmosphere, remnants of ancient volcanic activity. An idea began to form. Crazy, dangerous, probably impossible. But maybe, just maybe it could work. That he called Sylvan to the engineering bay at what passed for midnight on HFY Prime. The high architect arrived, looking annoyed at being disturbed during rest period, but the annoyance faded when David showed him the calculations. "You want to build a cryogenic tower," Sylvan said, studying the holographic schematics, "to flash freeze the upper atmosphere in a localized area." "Exactly. We cannot cool the entire planet, but we can create a small zone of intense cold. Using your heat reflector technology in reverse, we can force the temperature down low enough to crystallize water vapor. Snow. For how long? Maybe an hour. Maybe less. And it will destabilize your weather patterns for months afterward." Sylvan was quiet for a long time, his crystalline fingers tracing through the holographic data. "The energy requirements would drain a significant portion of our geothermal reserves. And if the temperature differential is even slightly incorrect, you could create a storm that would devastate the surface." "I know. Emperor Draven will never approve this. The risk is too great." "Then we convince him," David said. "Or we find another way. But this is the only solution I can see that might actually work." Sylvan looked at him with those multifaceted eyes. "Why does this matter so much to you? She is not your species. Not even your world." David hesitated, then pulled up a photo on his personal device. A young girl with dark hair and bright eyes, wearing a hospital gown, but still smiling at the camera. "My daughter Amy," he said. "She died 2 years ago. Cancer. I spent months trying to find a way to save her, threw everything I had at the problem. Money, time, every bit of knowledge I possessed. It was not enough. I cannot save her. And you think saving Lyra will change that?" "No," David said honestly. "Nothing will change what happened to Amy. But maybe I can make sure another father does not have to watch his child die when there might be a way to help." Sylvan studied the photo for a long moment. "Humans are strange creatures. You form attachments to beings you barely know, risk everything for causes that are not your own. It is inefficient. Probably. It is also—" Sylvan paused, searching for the right word. "Admirable. I will speak to Emperor Draven, but I make no promises. That is all I ask." 3 days later, David was summoned to the throne room. Emperor Draven sat in his crystal throne, Lyra beside him in a smaller seat. She looked even worse now, barely able to sit upright without support. Time was running out. "High Architect Sylvan has explained your plan," Emperor Draven said. "It is dangerous, reckless. The energy expenditure alone could damage our infrastructure for years." "Yes, sir. And yet you believe it will work." David chose his words carefully. "I believe it is possible. I cannot guarantee success, but I can guarantee I will do everything in my power to make it happen." Emperor Draven looked at his daughter, then back at David. "You have 14 days remaining of your allotted time. If you wish to attempt this madness, you may do so. But know that if you fail, the consequences will extend beyond simple expulsion." "I understand. I hope you do, Engineer Ross. I truly hope you do." Construction began in the Scorched Valley, a vast basin of black rock 20 miles outside the capital city. David chose this location because the geography would help contain the cold zone, acting like a bowl to hold the freezing air before it dissipated into the heat. The cryogenic tower rose slowly from the valley floor, a bizarre hybrid of human and Asheran engineering. Human cryotechnology formed the core, systems designed to flash freeze materials to hundreds of degrees below zero. Around this core, Asheran thermal architecture created a shell of heat-reflective crystal, the same material used in their buildings, but configured in reverse. Instead of pushing heat away, it would trap cold inside and force it downward. David worked 20-hour days, sleeping in a shelter near the construction site. His environmental suit was constantly running at maximum cooling capacity, fighting against the relentless heat. The other human engineers had received orders to leave Ashera Prime immediately. Political tensions were rising, and Earth's diplomatic corps wanted to avoid an incident. But 3 of them stayed behind anyway, risking their careers to help with the impossible project. "You know, we are all going to be fired for this," said Patricia Liu, a specialist in atmospheric dynamics. She was helping calibrate the upper-level processors, making sure the freeze zone would form at exactly the right altitude. "Probably," David agreed, checking structural integrity readings. "But at least we will be fired for something worthwhile." Sylvan coordinated the Osharan side of the construction. Dozens of workers carved cooling channels into the rock, creating a network that would draw geothermal energy from deep beneath the planet's surface. The tower needed enormous power, more than any human ship could provide. They would have to tap directly into Ashera Prime's molten core. On the 8th day, disaster nearly struck. A cooling line ruptured during a pressure test, releasing supercooled chemicals across the construction site. 3 Osharan workers were caught in the spray. The temperature drop was so sudden and extreme that their crystalline skin shattered like glass. David rushed to the medical facility where they had been taken. The doctors worked frantically, trying to stabilize the workers whose bodies had never experienced cold before. 2 of them survived with permanent scarring. The 3rd died before they could reverse the damage. Emperor Draven arrived at the construction site the next morning. David expected to be arrested or expelled or worse. Instead, the Emperor stood looking at the half-finished tower for a long time. Worker Talvin knew the risks, Draven said finally. He volunteered for this project, as did all of them. "I'm sorry," David said. "We should have had better safety protocols." "You are attempting to create weather that has never existed on this world," Draven replied. "There will be risks. The question is whether those risks are worthwhile." He turned to David. "Is it worthwhile?" David thought about Lyra, about Amy, about all the children who died because the universe was cruel and uncaring. "Yes," he said. "I think it is." "Then finish it." Lyra visited the construction site on the 10th day. She should not have been there, should have been resting in the palace, but she convinced her caretakers to bring her. David found her standing at the edge of the valley, looking up at the tower that now reached nearly 1,000 feet into the burning sky. "It is beautiful," she said. Her voice was weak now, barely audible even through the communication systems. "It is functional," David corrected gently. "Beauty was not part of the design. No, it is beautiful, because of what it represents." She reached out and took his hand, her crystalline fingers cool even through both their gloves. "Hope, that is beautiful." David felt something break inside him. This small alien child, dying on a planet that was killing her, still finding beauty in the world. Amy had been like that too, finding joy in small things, even as the cancer ate away at her. "You should not be here," he said. "The energy tests are dangerous." "I wanted to see it," Lyra said. In case I do not get to see the snow." "You will see the snow," David promised, hearing the desperation in his own voice. "For more days. We are almost ready." "My skin is failing faster now," Lyra said, looking at her hands where the gray patches had spread. "The doctors say I have maybe 6 days left. Maybe less." David knelt beside her. "Then we work faster. I will make this happen, Lyra. I promise." She smiled, or at least David thought she did. It was hard to read expressions on a crystalline face. "You are a good person, David Ross. Amy will be proud of you." He had told her about Amy during one of their talks. Somehow this small alien child understood his grief better than most humans. After Lyra left, David pushed the work crews harder. They reinforced the tower's structure, double-checked every connection, ran simulation after simulation. The margin for error was impossibly small. If the temperature drop was too slow, the water vapor would not crystallize. Too fast, and they would create a catastrophic storm that could level the capital city. On the 12th day, Patricia pulled David aside. "We have a problem. The planet's core is less stable than the Osharan scans indicated. When we draw this much power, there is a 30% chance of triggering seismic activity. How bad? Could collapse some of the underground cities. Could kill thousands." David stared at the data, feeling the weight of it. Save one child, risk thousands of lives. It was an impossible choice, the kind that had no right answer. He went to Emperor Draven with the information. The Emperor listened quietly, his face unreadable. If this were a military decision, Draven said, the choice would be simple. One life cannot outweigh thousands. But this is my daughter, and I'm tired of making military decisions. What do you want me to do? Emperor Draven looked out over the Scorched Valley at the tower that reached toward the twin suns. Proceed. If the planet cracks open, at least we tried something impossible. At least we reached for something beyond ourselves. David had 48 hours left to make it snow. Final preparations consumed the last 2 days. David did not sleep, running on stimulants and desperation. The tower was complete, a gleaming spire of crystal and metal that looked like it belonged in a science fiction story rather than reality. Cooling channels snaked across the valley floor, connected to geothermal taps that reached miles beneath the surface. Atmospheric processors ringed the site, ready to redirect air currents into the freeze zone. News of the project had spread across HFY Prime. Thousands of Asherans gathered at viewing points around the valley, curious about the strange human who promised to make frozen rain fall from their burning sky. Many thought it was impossible. Some thought it was sacrilege, an insult to the twin suns that had forged their species. But they came anyway, unable to resist witnessing either a miracle or a spectacular failure. Patricia finished the final calibration on the upper atmosphere processors. Energy flow is stable. Thermal readings are within acceptable parameters. We are as ready as we will ever be. Define acceptable, David said, studying the holographic displays that showed every system in the tower. Meaning there is a 60% chance this works perfectly, a 20% chance nothing happens, and a 20% chance we create a localized weather catastrophe that makes hurricanes look gentle. Those are not great odds. They're the best we have. Sylvan approached, his crystalline skin catching the harsh sunlight. Emperor Draven is bringing Princess Lyra to the observation pavilion. The medical team advises against it, but she insisted. David felt a spike of fear. How bad is she? She has perhaps 2 days remaining. Her crystalline structure is collapsing from the inside. If your snow does not work. Sylvan left the sentence unfinished. It will work, David said, trying to convince himself as much as anyone. You cannot know that. No, but I can believe it. An hour before activation, David walked through the tower one final time. Every connection was secure. Every system tested and retested. The cryogenic core sat at the tower's heart, containing enough supercooled chemicals to freeze a small ocean. When released into the upper atmosphere through the launch tubes, those chemicals would create a cascade reaction. Water vapor would crystallize around them, forming ice crystals. Snow.at least, that was the theory. David climbed to the observation platform, where Emperor Draven waited with Lyra. The princess was wrapped in multiple protective layers, her caretakers monitoring her vital signs constantly. Even through the suit, David could see how much worse she looked. The gray patches covered most of her crystalline skin now, and she moved slowly, like every motion hurt. Is it time? She asked, her voice barely a whisper through the communication system. Almost, David said, kneeling beside her chair. Are you ready to see snow? I have been ready my whole life. David looked at Emperor Draven. The ruler of 17 conquered worlds looked smaller somehow, just a father watching his child die. Whatever happens, Draven said, you gave her hope. That is worth something. Hope is only worth something if we deliver, David replied. He returned to the control station at the tower's base. The other engineers were already at their positions, hands hovering over controls. David checked the chronometer. Both suns were at their zenith, the hottest part of the Asheran day. Temperature readings showed 192 degrees, perfect conditions for creating the maximum temperature differential. All systems ready, Patricia reported. Energy draw is stable. Atmospheric processors are aligned. David looked up at the sky, at the twin suns burning overhead. Somewhere up there, in the upper atmosphere, invisible currents of superheated air waited to be transformed. His finger hovered over the activation control. He thought about Amy, about sitting beside her hospital bed, holding her hand as machines beeped and doctors spoke in quiet voices about things they could not fix. He thought about the helplessness, the rage at a universe that let children suffer. He thought about promises made to dying girls who deserved better than what fate had given them. Initiating sequence, David said, and pressed the control. The tower hummed to life. Deep beneath the valley, geothermal taps opened, drawing massive amounts of energy from the planet's molten core. The ground trembled slightly as power flooded into the system. Warning lights flashed across the control panel, but all readings stayed within acceptable ranges. The cryogenic core engaged. Supercooled chemicals raced through kilometers of piping, their temperature so low that the metal tubes themselves began to frost over despite the external heat. The tower created a visible column of shimmer in the air, cold meeting heat in a violent boundary. Atmosphere processors roared to life, their energy fields redirecting wind currents from across the region. Air rushed into the valley, pulled by the temperature differential. David watched the readings climb, numbers scrolling faster than he could process them. 40,000 feet up, the cryogenic payload launched. Tubes at the tower's peak released the supercooled chemicals in a precisely calculated burst. The chemicals hit the upper atmosphere and began their work, stealing heat from everything they touched. The sky began to change. David saw it first as a darkening, a shadow spreading across the usual brass-colored brightness. The atmosphere processors showed water vapor crystallizing at impossible rates, forming structures that Ashera Prime had never seen before. Clouds, dark, heavy, laden with moisture that was rapidly cooling. The temperature differential created wind, and the wind pushed the clouds across the valley. David's instruments showed the cold air descending, pushed down by its own weight. The temperature at ground level dropped. 190, 180, 170. Asherans in the viewing areas stepped back in alarm, their heat-adapted bodies sensing something fundamentally wrong with the air point. 160. 150. And then, like a miracle, it began. Small white specks appeared in the air, falling from the dark clouds. At first, they evaporated before reaching the ground, vanishing in puffs of steam. But David adjusted the intensity, pushing more cold air down, supercooling the lower atmosphere. The white specks made it closer, closer, and then the first snowflake touched the scorched rock of the valley floor and did not melt. Snow fell on Ashera Prime. Tea started slowly, single flakes drifting down through air that had never known such cold. They caught the light from the twin suns, each one a tiny piece of crystallized water that scattered light like the Asherans themselves. More flakes followed, then more, until the air was full of falling white. David stood at the control station, barely breathing, watching the temperature readings drop. 140 degrees. 130. The snowflakes were surviving longer now, some making it all the way to the ground before melting. The valley floor was wet with their melted remains, dark rock turning darker with moisture on the observation platform. Lyra pressed against the protective barrier, watching the snow fall with an expression David could not quite read on her crystalline face. Emperor Draven stood beside her, one hand on her shoulder, staring at the impossible sight. Temperature at 120, Patricia called out. Snowfall rate increasing. The system is holding stable. David made minute adjustments to the atmospheric processors, fine-tuning the air currents. The snow needed to fall faster, thicker. He pushed more cryogenic material into the upper atmosphere, forcing the temperature down harder. 110 degrees. 100. The snow began to accumulate. Thin layers of white appeared on the black rocks, vanishing quickly but being replaced by more. Asherans in the viewing areas reached out tentatively, letting snowflakes land on their crystalline skin. Many flinched away from the cold, a sensation their species had never evolved to process. Others stared in wonder, watching the white flakes melt on contact with their heat. 90 degrees. 85. The snow was falling heavily now, real snow, the kind David remembered from Earth winters. It accumulated faster than it could melt, building up on the rocks, on the tower, on every surface in the valley. The dark landscape was transforming, becoming white. "David," Patricia said urgently, "we have seismic activity. Small tremors from the geothermal taps." "How small?" "Magnitude 2.3, but increasing. The energy draw is destabilizing the fault lines." David looked at the power readings. They were pulling enormous amounts of energy from the planet's core, more than he had calculated. But if he reduced the power now, the snow would stop. He needed at least 30 more minutes to generate enough cold for Lyra's treatment. "Can we compensate?" he asked. "Not without reducing the cryogenic output." David made a decision that might doom them all. "Keep it running. Full power." The ground trembled beneath his feet. Not much, just a slight vibration, but on a planet that rarely experienced earthquakes, it was alarming. Alarms sounded across the valley as automated systems detected the seismic activity, but the snow kept falling to 75 degrees. 70. The valley was white now, properly white, snow accumulating into a blanket that covered everything. It was the most beautiful and terrifying thing David had ever created. Beautiful because it was working, terrifying because he was not sure he could stop it if things went wrong. On the observation platform, medical personnel rushed to Lyra's side. David saw them through the cameras, saw them removing parts of her protective suit, exposing her crystalline skin to the cold air. She should have been bundled up, protected from the freezing temperature. Instead, they were deliberately exposing her to it. Because the cold was the cure, David watched the medical readings that were being transmitted to his station. Lyra's body temperature was dropping rapidly, faster than would be safe for a human. But Asherans were not human. Their crystalline structure responded to temperature in ways carbon-based biology never could. And amazingly, impossibly, her skin was regenerating. The gray patches were shrinking, healthy crystal structure spreading outward from the areas exposed to cold. The scale fade was reversing, her body using the cold to rebuild what had been breaking down. The medical team worked quickly, carefully controlling her exposure, making sure the temperature drop was not too extreme to 65 degrees. 60, the major tremor shook the valley. Rocks tumbled from the surrounding cliffs. Several viewing platforms swayed dangerously. David heard screaming through the communication channels, Asherans panicking as their world literally shook beneath them. "We need to shut it down," Sylvan said, appearing beside David at the control station. "The fault lines are fracturing. If this continues, we could trigger a catastrophic earthquake." "How much longer does Lyra need?" David asked. Sylvan checked the medical data. "At least 15 more minutes at this temperature. Anything less, and the regeneration will not be complete." David looked at the seismic readings, at the power consumption, at the snow, still falling thick and heavy. 15 minutes. It might as well be 15 hours. The planet was coming apart beneath them. Another tremor, stronger this time. Magnitude 4.1. Underground cities would be feeling this, structures never designed for seismic stress beginning to crack. 10 minutes, David said. "That is all I can give her." He began the shutdown sequence, slowly reducing the cryogenic output. The snow would keep falling for a while on its own momentum, the cold air already in the system working its way through. But new material stopped flowing into the upper atmosphere. The temperature stabilized at 58 degrees. Still cold enough for the treatment to continue. Still warm enough that the planet might forgive what he had done to it. David watched Lyra through the cameras. Her skin was almost completely regenerated now, the healthy crystalline structure gleaming even in the dim light under the snow clouds. She was laughing, actually laughing, as snowflakes landed on her face and hands. The medical team monitored her carefully, but they were smiling too. The snow fell for exactly 47 minutes before the system finally shut down completely. The clouds began to break apart, the cold air dissipating into the surrounding heat. Temperature readings started to climb back toward normal, but the valley remained white. Snow covered everything, several inches deep in places, a blanket of impossible cold on the hottest planet in the known galaxy. It would melt eventually, probably within a few hours. But for now, it was perfect. David collapsed into a chair, exhaustion hitting him like a physical weight. He had done it. Against every reasonable expectation, against physics itself, he had made it snow on Ashera Prime, and he had saved a little girl's life. 3 months passed before David stood in the Scorched Valley again. The snow was long gone, melted within hours of the tower, shutting down. But the valley itself had changed. Where snow had fallen, the rock had been altered by the sudden temperature shock, creating patterns in the stone that caught light differently. From above, the valley floor looked like a vast crystalline mosaic. The Asherans had built a memorial garden around the tower. Protected by stasis fields, they had preserved chunks of snow and ice, keeping them frozen in time. Holographic displays showed recordings of the snowfall from dozens of angles, capturing that impossible moment when winter came to a world that had never known cold. David walked through the garden, his environmental suit no longer necessary. The Asherans had installed climate control systems throughout the memorial, keeping the temperature at a comfortable 70 degrees. It was still the coldest permanent location on the entire planet. "You are leaving today," Lyra said, appearing beside him. She wore no protective suit now, her crystalline skin fully healed and gleaming with health. She had grown in the past 3 months, shot up several inches, her body making up for the time it had spent fighting the scale fade. "My ship departs in a few hours," David confirmed. "My work here is done, but you will come back." It was not a question. "I promised to take you to see real mountains, real winter." That promise still stands. Lyra picked up a small crystal case from one of the display pedestals. Inside, preserved in perfect stasis, was a single snowflake. The holographic microscope showed its intricate structure, six-sided and unique, a tiny piece of frozen water that should never have existed on Ashera Prime. "I have collected 17 of these," she said. "Each one different. Did you know that? Every snowflake is unique." "I knew. I want to see millions of them. I want to see so many that I cannot possibly count them all." David smiled. "Then you will definitely need to visit Earth. We have more snow than we know what to do with in winter." They walked together to the central plaza where a massive statue had been erected. It showed a human figure and an Asheran child standing together, snowflakes falling around them. The plaque at the base was written in both human languages and Asheran script. "On this day, engineer David Ross of Earth brought winter to Ashera Prime. In doing so, he showed us that the impossible is merely the difficult not yet attempted." "Your father wrote that," David said. "He wanted something that captured what you did. Not just the technical achievement, but the meaning behind it." Emperor Draven approached from the palace entrance, flanked by his usual guards, but walking with less formality than David remembered. The past 3 months had changed the Emperor too. He smiled more now, at least when Lyra was around. "The diplomatic delegation from Earth has arrived," Draven said. "They are quite eager to formalize our new alliance." "Alliance?" David asked. "Did you think we would simply let you leave after what you accomplished?" Draven gestured at the memorial garden at the city beyond. "You have changed Ashera Prime in ways that go far beyond saving one child. Our scientists are now studying cold-based physics. Our engineers are designing new technologies around principles we never imagined. You have opened doors we did not know existed. I just wanted to help Lyra, and in doing so, helped all of us." Draven placed a hand on David's shoulder, a gesture that would have been unthinkable 3 months ago when humans were barely tolerated visitors. "The Asheran Empire has conquered 17 worlds through military might. But you conquered our hearts through compassion. That is a far more powerful weapon." Sylvan arrived, carrying a small case. "Your shuttle is prepared, but before you go, the High Council wanted to present you with something." He opened the case to reveal a crystal star, perfectly cut and polished, glowing with an internal light. "This is the Star of Ashera, our highest civilian honor. It has been awarded only 12 times in our recorded history. You are the first non-Asheran to receive it." David took the crystal carefully. It was warm to the touch, holding heat the way Asheran technology always did. "I do not know what to say." "Say you will return," Lyra said. "Say you will teach us more about your world, your science, your way of seeing the impossible as merely difficult." David knelt down, so he was eye level with her. "I will return. That is a promise." and I've gotten pretty good at keeping those." She hugged him, her crystalline arms surprisingly strong. He hugged her back, this small alien child who had become so important to him. When they separated, she pressed something into his hand. A snow globe, but made of Oshiran crystal, with tiny white particles that swirled when shaken. "So you do not forget," she said. "I could never forget." The shuttle ride back to orbit was quiet. David sat by the viewport, watching Ashera Prime recede below him. The Scorched Valley was visible from this altitude, a pale patch against the red and black landscape. The memorial garden glinted in the light of the twin suns. Patricia sat across from him. "You know what you did down there, right? You did not just save one kid. You changed the political landscape of this entire sector. Earth and Ashera Prime are going to be allies now. Maybe even friends. That was not what I was trying to do, but it is what you did anyway. That is the thing about acts of kindness. They ripple outward in ways you can never predict." David shook the snow globe Lyra had given him, watching the white particles swirl in their crystal prison. He thought about Amy, about how much she would have loved this story. Her father, making it snow on an alien world, saving a princess with science and stubbornness. Maybe she knew. Maybe somehow, wherever she was, she knew and was proud. The ship jumped to faster-than-light travel, and Ashera Prime disappeared from view. But David knew he would see it again. He had promises to keep, snowflakes to show a curious princess, winters to share with a species that had never known cold. The universe was vast and often cruel, full of diseases that could not be cured and children who died too young. But sometimes, just sometimes, you could take a piece of the impossible and make it real. You could bring snow to a burning world. You could keep a promise to a dying child. And that, David thought, was worth everything.